fine New Orleans player. He was involved at one point with the, maybe still a little bit, with the Terra Verde movement, David Thomas Roberts, and of course our lovely artist friend Scott Kirby. And you've been in New Orleans 35 years?
I have, yes.
Yes, so, and he's...
But I grew up in St. Louis and knew Trey Bertishner at age 14.
So he's going to give us some perspective, different perspectives on ragtime we don't get often to hear. So,
yeah, thank you,
okay,
Bill.
thank you, Tom McDermott.
Yeah. So my name is Tom McDermott. I grew up in St. Louis, moved to New Orleans, as Bill said. Grew up as a ragtime kid and then eventually expanded out into other things. In the 80s and 90s, I met people like David Thomas Roberts and Frank French, and at some point I met Hal Isbitz, and I consider David, Frank, Hal, and Scott Kirby to be the core of this group called Terra Verde. Terra Verde was coined in the 90s, David thinks around 94, as a alternative. They felt like the term ragtime was limiting their audience, that had connotations to going back to the Shakey's days, perhaps, or whatever. So, and also they were writing different kinds of music, which I think was spurred on initially by their various exposures to Latin American composers. And Frank French, who is here and is going to play for us today, told me just now that Hal Isbitz, who is 88 years old, and one of the finest of these composers, did not write, he wrote rags until he heard Ernesto Nazare's music, the Brazilian choro composer, which swept through our crowd and really turned a lot of people on their heads because the music was so similar to Joplin and classic ragtime, same forms, rhythms very close. Anyway, I would like to start with Hal, and you know, my impression, being that they called it Terra Verde, was that it was really spurred on by the influence of these Latin American composers who used rhythms that really were very important in the development of ragtime as well. They're just sort of hidden because of the umpa bass, but the syncopation, the rhythms played in the right hand reflect Afro-Cuban rhythms. So what I would like to do is try and play pieces that are Latinate and then go beyond that, as Scott and David especially would like to do, and emphasize that no, it's not just a Latinate thing. It has to do with well, let me tell you David's quote. You know, David's full of quotes, as you probably know, if you're familiar with him. Just a second, I'm sorry. David gave an interview with a fellow named Doug Carnegie and said, he refers to Terra Verde, came about because we, the composers, had long discussed how to refer to this eclectic, evolving, ragtime-based contemporary neo-romantic music. Now, that's a pretty wide-open thing there, but and it's also a little confusing to me how to separate what is called new ragtime from Terra Verde. But Bill, if I could have your help, I'm going to play a couple pieces of Hal Isbitz to start with.
Oh man, the computer.
Hal has not recorded his own music, but other people have, especially John Arpin, who did a beautiful album called Blue Gardenia, which I think every lover of ragtime music should have in their collection. It's just very exquisite.
So these are ours.
Yes, so I think the first cut we want to play is called At Midnight.
There's no track names on it.
That's okay, it's number 1. Yeah. Okay, at midnight. I realize you don't want to spend your whole time listening to CDs, so I will be playing later, as will Frank French, so stick around if you can. Next piece I'd like to play is from a fantastic collection, I think, put out by Scott, Frank, and David on the Pinelands Recordings label, just called Terra Verde, and it was their statement, initial statement, as to what this music is all about. And it opens with, it's a pretty straight rag. I'm a little confused as to why this couldn't just be called New Ragtime. In any case, it's a wonderful piece. I think it deserves to be as well known as, you know, Roberto Clemente or Graceful Ghosts or Belle of Louisville or any of the more popular pieces that have been, you know, been created that I know of. Anyway, I will admit that I'm not a omnivore and not thoroughly knowledgeable of the modern ragtime world. I just have poked in. I've just had my experiences, but this is just a perfect piece of music called the Chandelier Rag. Once again by Hal Isbitz, but this time played by Scott Kirby. First number. Scott Kirby. I think I'll interject now and play, I don't consider myself a core member of this group, but I share the love of a lot of certainly the Latin composers, Nazare, Gottschalk, who is really American, but did all sorts of early Latin music, and the island composers like La Clona and Campos, whoever. I'm gonna play a tango that was inspired by David Thomas Roberts, and I don't think it was inspired by Nazare, more likely by Gottschalk, because I didn't hear Nazare till '84. '84 is when Arthur Mariera Lima had an album of his Nazare playing released in North America on the Pro Arte digital label, and that's when a lot of a certain crowd became very infatuated with him. But this is a tango called The Big Man. I would like to move back into the world of the rhythmic and play a piece by Scott Kirby, played by Scott Kirby from his album On Lincoln Place. This is cut number 9. Scott was very influenced by a Trinidadian, well, all the people we've named so far, but also a Trinidadian composer named Lionel Velasco, who wrote some very interesting pieces, very interesting Venezuelan waltzes that more and more people are playing now. But this piece has a rhythm that would be from that area. It's the cinquillo, whereas the tresillo is dum bom 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 bom. Cinquillo is a 5-note rhythm. As you'll hear, Scott can really jam on this type of rhythm, and this is just a really hard-driving piece with a lot of interesting stuff going on in honor of Lionel Velasco. honor of the. It's called Belasco, named after Lionel Belasco, who was born in Barbados, made famous in Trinidad, and but also wrote Venezuelan waltzes. He's just he's polyglot. You know, I was hoping to have, I'm running out of time, but I did want to play one more short Scott Kirby piece that is not Latinate at all, but is really beautiful. 15, cut number 15 from this. This is from the Terra Verde album too. This is, yeah, Phil just said he loves this album. Of course he would. Of course he would. This is called Recovery Part 1. And it has a ostinato, but that's about the only tie to ragtime it would have, I think. There you go.
Tom, if you were to describe Terra Verde to a total novice, and not saying, here's an example, how would you go about? I mean, ragtime, we do have some set of parameters we can discuss.
Boy, yeah, it's all over the map to me. To me, the most exciting part is the Latin pieces, but you know, I love a piece like that too, which has nothing to do with ragtime, as I said, except the fact that it has a steady 4 in the left hand. So it's David would insist that there's an element of interiority or inwardness, that a neo-romanticism to it that dominates.
So it's a hybrid, you'd say,
Yeah.
of the Latin music and ragtime. There's syncopation
Yeah.
in it, there's regularity in the left hand.
I'm not sure if it even has to be syncopated. You would think so, if derived from ragtime.
But unlike ragtime, this is entirely instrumental.
That is true. That is true. So we got to get through 2 more guys, 2 of the core members. And this is David Thomas Roberts, who, because of the economics of making CDs today, is grossly under-recorded. Both he and Scott Kirby have just been like spitting out piece after piece. Scott is well represented on his YouTube channel, and just fantastic pieces. and a white, getting further away from, he's doing all sorts of things. And David has gone in a neo-minimalist direction that's kind of interesting. But anyway, this is a piece that he thought was well representative of, maybe not the best, but one of his good Terra Verde pieces from his last album, Discovery. This is called Babe of the Mountains, and it's track 11. And then we're going to have Frank French come up and end the program.
Observation I would make on a lot of Terra Verde and what I heard there is, and this happened maybe sometimes late in the ragtime era, the right hand usually just stated the melody in a lot of ragtime. In the Terra Verde, the melodies seem to be simpler, but there's an accompaniment, an inner voice to that, which pervades a lot of it.
Yes, that makes sense. And the more you play in the left hand, the less you have to play in the right hand.
Right.
Yeah? So I'd like to now invite up Frank French, who came as a surprise when I told him about this event, and now wants to do his own documentary on the Terra Verde people, which is great. And Frank was into Gottschalk and was into Nazare before any of us were. any of our crowds. So, and recorded whole albums of both those guys, which I don't think anybody in this Terra Verde Corps has done. So please welcome Frank French.
Well, Tom earlier mentioned this thing called cinquillo, which implies 5 pulses. Now, I have a somewhat different understanding of it from Cuban music, where you find it not solely in Cuban music, but it is a 5-pulse that extends over 2 bars, 2 measures of music, and it can be heard in the maple leaf rag. The Cubans have a metronome that they call a clave, which synchronizes their music, and it sounds something like this with a downbeat. Now, if you take Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag, you can hear that right at the beginning. Yeah, so da 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 da, ba 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 bum ba ba bum. So Joplin was no stranger to this. It certainly has its origins in West African music. If you want to get into musical anthropology, it all goes back there. And it's found in ragtime a lot. And when I visited Cuba in 1996 for the first time, I started to hear these things and then got interested in using it as a formula for extending syncopation beyond what has been known as the tristia, which was more like something like this. Which is found the tango, bum, bum, to make it 2-bar phrasing, which would find its way into, when I was there, I listened to Cuban pianists, and they were always accenting the 4th beat, and they count the measure in 4 beats, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, so you hear a lot of stuff like this. This is a syncopation that goes over 2 bars, and of course you hear it in ragtime too. So anyway, that's a brief explanation of that. And so I recently got this idea for this piece, which also incorporates that. And it's so new that I have to read it off of a chart. Sorry, but it's very recent, like within the last couple of weeks. But it's incorporating a lot of what Tom talked about. You've got the syncopation. You've got the elements from other kinds of music, not just romantic music, also earlier music. And you've got contemporary popular styles of music too. All of these are found in what is called Terra Verde, which to my mind, in retrospect, was kind of like a way of rebranding music, which people do in the music industry all the time. We're playing the same pulse in hip-hop that we played with ragtime. The melody just disappeared, but the pulse is still there. So rebranding is nothing new. Oh, that was rock and roll, now it's called this. It's a way of, reformulating something you're already familiar with. And that's kind of one aspect of what Terra Verde was, and still is, I suppose. So this piece is just composed. It's called The Effect.
So our thanks to Tom McDermott, New Orleans, Frank French, you're still Colorado, correct?
Yes.
Yes, so from extreme ends almost here, all meeting in the middle and all like-minded and loving this music, as are you.